Hi, everyone. I'm Riley Genoso, Public Programs Manager at the Staten Island Museum, and I'm so happy you could join us for today's Lunch and Learn. This series connects to an online exhibition opening in November, celebrating the museum's 140th anniversary through a selection of objects found in the museum's collection. The object we'll be focusing on today is a specimen of the American chestnut found in our herbarium. Here to tell us more about it is Portia J. Perkins, a Florida-born, Virginia-raised wildlifer, forester, social scientist, artist, and poet. She holds a BS in Wildlife and Fisheries Biology with a minor in Environmental Science and Policy from Clemson University, and an MS in Forestry from Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Portia's job and work centers the African-diasporic experience with land management and nature in the Southeast, with a focus on storytelling and connection. Before I eagerly hand this over to Portia, I just want to let everyone know that this presentation is being recorded and will appear on our website in the coming weeks. Also, a gentle reminder to keep your mics on mute and funnel any questions you might have towards the chat. We will have some time at the end for some Q&A. Now, without further ado, please welcome Portia J. Perkins.
Thank you so much, Riley. Hello, everyone. My name is Portia Perkins, and I currently serve as the Federal Lands Associate at Defenders of Wildlife in Washington, D.C., where we focus on native wildlife conservation on federal public land. My background is in wildlife and fisheries biology and forestry, with an emphasis on herpetology and the social aspects of forestry and prescribed fire. My work, as was mentioned, centers the African-diasporic experience in discussions of landscape management and natural resources. I use poetry, art, storytelling, and connection to achieve understanding and propel abstract thought. Today, I hope to use that skill and a sprinkle of joy to tell you the story of the American chestnut, one of the most versatile and prominent trees of the past 4 million years and a keystone species. American chestnut once existed in ecosystems of the temperate mid-Atlantic and Southeast, all the way north to the boreal forests of Canada. American chestnut, or Castanea dentata, as it is known scientifically, met its match in less than 40 years. But before we get into that, I'm going to give you some naming and identification tools so you can get to know the species a little better. American chestnut can be described as a native perennial in the family Fagaceae, and the genus Castanea, which are generally grouped as chestnuts. This group includes Chinese, Japanese, and European chestnuts, Allegheny chica-pin, and even horse chestnut. The dentata comes from the Latin meaning tooth and describes the larger and more widely spaced bristle-tipped saw teeth on the edges of its leaves. These leaves can be described as lanceolate and narrow oval-shaped tapering with a point at the end, or similar to the sword of, say, Sir Lancelot. It's kind of quite noble if you think about it. American chestnuts can reach heights upwards of 60 to 90, even 100 feet in some records in healthy populations, with an average diameter of 3 to 5 feet. And sitting through this video camera, I'm only 5'2", so that's pretty wide. For us, the most notable thing about those chestnut trees are those chestnuts that drop coincidentally between September and November, just in time for winter, often for roasting on open fires. American chestnuts are the fruit of the tree, considered an edible nut, and they are produced in clusters of 2 or 3 and covered in a burr. Think of it like your favorite winter coat, and all covered in spines, of course, to protect you as you're falling from this enormous tree. I first learned about this species in my dermatology class at Clemson University in the upstate of South Carolina, and was given this special tip to never confuse Castanea dentata from aeusles or horse chestnuts. You have to remember those porcupine-like spines and husks instead of a bumpy, fleshy bulb. Beyond these features, American chestnut has created many of the luxuries of life that we know today. So here in this image to the left, you'll see the bumpy, fleshy bulb that surrounds the fruit of the horse chestnut, quite inedible. And then you have sort of this brownish, mossy green covered bird-like coat around this waxy coated nut, which is American chestnut. American chestnut was used by Native and non-Native Americans alike for every feature of life imaginable. Also known by its many names like the bread tree, there were chestnut logs for cabins, shingles for roofs, firewood, poles for rural telephone lines, paneling, trim, furniture, and even caskets. It did all of that while still providing regular nourishment and built cultural significance to wildlife species like wild turkeys, fox squirrels, the tufted titmouse, and even us humans. In many Native tribes, the American chestnut has been described as grandfather of the forest, and its presence emerges in stories from every Native linguistic group east of the Mississippi. There is a tale of the Haudenosaunee, meaning people of the Longhouse or Iroquois, titled Hodedenan, the last one left in the chestnut tree. It is both fable and allegory. The tale follows a boy who unwittingly uses up his uncle's last chestnut and sets out to find more. During his dangerous journey, he must battle snakes, bears, panthers, and the seven sisters who oversee the forest. Successful in his mission, he returns home and hands out chestnut seeds among all of his people, with a promise and a mission to plant them all over so that they can be shared with everyone. American chestnut also comes up in use by the Cherokee, turning the leaves into cough syrup. The Iroquois again grinded the wood into a powder to use for chafed skin, and the Mohegans made tea from the leaves to treat rheumatism and colds. Though not heavily included in the written and oral history of the species, Afro-descendant communities served as the workforce that supplied the high demand for American chestnut as a timber product. Many African-American communities facilitated everything from tree plantings and forest cruising to cutting and refining for products. And like its many uses and abundant demand, we could have never imagined what was about to happen next. When we entered the 20th century, the once royal and life-sustaining giant will be reduced by a fungus formerly known as Diaporthe parasitica, then Endothea parasitica, and now Crypphononectria parasitica, or more simply put, chestnut blight. Chestnut blight entered the US when Japanese chestnut trees were being imported in the late 1800s. A simple human mishap. Then in 1904, Mr. H.W. Merkel of the Bronx Zoo in New York City noticed that the park's chestnut trees were dying in droves. He studied several of these trees and found large patches of dying bark. He brought his specimens to Dr. A.W. Merrill of the New York Botanical Garden. Dr. Merrill carefully examined them and in 1906 published his conclusions that the disease was caused by a fungus new to science. Then came other reports of what seemed to be the same trouble came from the metropolitan area. So specimens were sent to the federal government's Bureau of Plant Industry. Well, that was only the beginning, because by May of 1907, reports showed that the disease was as far north as Poughkeepsie, New York, as far south as Trenton, New Jersey, and was generally spread all over several New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut counties. At least 2 competent observers reported having seen a similar disturbance on Long Island as early as 1893, making it likely that the blight had been seen or at least known of prior to its initial discovery. In 1909, Dr. Haven Metcalf, pathologist in charge of the government's new laboratory of forest pathology, and a co-worker, Dr. J.F. Collins, wrote the very first bulletin on the blight, describing its history, cause, symptoms, and damage, and urging the states to take action to check the disease out. 2 years later, they issued another bulletin specifically on control, in which they outlined a plan to stop the disease. They offer quite a few methods, like eliminating American chestnut from nurseries, inspecting chestnut nursery stock, conducting quarantines. They mentioned the establishment of a blight-free zone along the edge of the main infected areas and eradication of advanced infection beyond that zone. The bulletin even went as far as recommending tree surgery to remove the areas of diseased bark called cankers. Well, this initiated a frenzy of pathologists, biologists, and tree huggers alike to pinpoint dying and/or infected trees and pursue routes to heal them. a costly pursuit, but given at the time, it was a main resource in daily life, so it felt needed. However, their efforts were no match for the fungus's key weapon, oxalic acid. A compound is a common compound that's found in plants and is used to make oxalate, which helps to rid excess calcium by binding to it. But this fungus used the acid in a different way. Oxalic acid in chestnut blight is used to kill the tree's cambium, a crucial layer of the tissue between the bark and the stems that create new cells. Afterward, the fungus feeds on the dead tissue. The fungus distributed itself by means of microscopic seed-like spores formed in cavities in the diseased bark. And to add to that, there were summer spores and winter spores. Pictured here are the summer spores, which create an orangish-brown sticky mass from the bark cavities, like toothpaste from a tube, following warm summer rains. These spores would stick to the feet of birds and insects and get carried long distances to infect other trees, allowing for rapid dispersion across short and long distances. The winter spores puffed from the other bark cavities in tiny clouds and were carried by the wind to nearby trees. Both kinds of spores can infect a healthy tree so long as they were carried into a wound and could germinate there, sending their fine fungus threads into the inner bark, killing vital cells as they invade it. Once this bark killing reached all the way around a tree or branch, death of all parts beyond followed. Just like that, a giant became a ghost. American chestnut stands began to decline by the hundreds and thousands. Through the 1920s and 30s, chestnut blight spread its arms wide, from the southern mountains of Appalachia and North Carolina out to the edges of Ohio, to the point that today few stands are known that don't carry chestnut blight in some capacity, which led many to believe we may have seen the last of American chestnut, the ecosystems, and the lifestyle it helped maintain. Even with such a voracious fungus, hope remains strong in my mind and heart, and many other scientists as well. As I began to refresh my memory of the American chestnut for this presentation, I noticed that the answers could be wrapped up in the species traits and even genes. As I cannot go anywhere without talking about fire ecology's role in forests, American chestnut cannot be excluded either. American chestnut once coexisted with many drier woodland and fire-adapted species like chestnut pine and pitch pine, and as its decline continued, the makeup of these forests changed right along with it. Now, mostly made up of species dependent on moderate moisture and having fire sensitivities like sugar maple, tulip poplar, and DC's most exclusive tree, American beech. These changes in the structure of the forest suggest alterations to the fire regimes, food availability for birds and mammals, a decline in chestnut moths, changes in nutrient recycling, and woody debris decomposition. History suggests that frequent fires in forests within the American chestnut range have occurred, and the most direct evidence of fire is American chestnuts in the American chestnuts range has come from charcoal and pollen analyses and soil and sediment studies, showing periods of higher fire activity or large charcoal accumulation, which coincide with American chestnut pollen abundance. In another study showing similar charcoal distribution, there were indications that fire was not just being limited to these dry ridge tops that we know of, but also extending downslope towards more temperate areas of the forest. This information, plus the high flammability of American chestnut leaf litter, invites fire to the table again and again in a shorter amount of time. American chestnut has some special fire adaptations too. They are a long-living species and grow quickly, allowing them to maintain large heights, which limits the potential for crown fire and giving them the ability to rapidly heal from fire-induced wounds. The trees are deeply rooted and produce sprouts in high numbers, so in openings created from a wave of fire, we would expect American chestnut jumped at the opportunity to catch some sunlight and distribute sprouts. The same rapid reproduction and deep root system is why the species is considered functionally extinct, because chestnut blight does not kill the tree root system and has continued to show survival through stem sprouts, though they eventually die back down. American chestnut and other species show similar traits. These may have promoted a more frequent, lower intensity fire regime. Today, we know many years of fire suppression in forested ecosystems and have not seen fires at the frequency or intensity in some time. The fire regime we know today is mostly absent of American chestnut and is meek compared and has been pushed along by prescribed fire, hoping to restore fire-adapted ecosystems. As of 2018, American chestnut is listed under the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN Red List, as critically endangered, which can be an unsettling future to have. Its battle with chestnut blight and the resulting changes in its former ecosystem have pushed it further and further towards extinction. However, what I didn't mention was that early in the battle of the chestnut blight, it was observed that the Chinese and Japanese chestnut plants in this country did not succumb to the blight. It was thought that making hybrid trees and introducing them in place of the susceptible American chestnut would work. Unfortunately, even with their good blight resistance, they weren't well equipped to thrive in US eastern forests like American chestnut once did. Organizations like the American Chestnut Foundation continue to do research to find the perfect mixture of genes for blight resistance. Back in the 80s, they introduced their back-cross breeding program, which had a consequence of genetically modifying the American chestnut genome with a small percentage of Asian genome so that the species could persist in its forest ecosystem, but also have blight resistance. Given the complications of many separate Asian chestnut genes, contributing to blight resistance complicates the breeding process. To this day, the American Chestnut Foundation's sole goal and purpose is to pursue research to develop blight resistance and initiate reintroduction of the American chestnut. The bulletin even went as far as recommending tree surgery to remove the areas of diseased bark called cankers. These initiated a frenzy of pathologists, biologists, and tree huggers alike to pinpoint dying and or infected trees and pursue routes to heal them. A costly pursuit, but warranted at the given time because American chestnut, of course, was a main part of daily life. And I may have jumped a little bit forward with my slides. Apologize for that so you guys can see. However, their efforts were no match really for the fungus's key weapon, which is oxalic acid. So oxalic acid is a common compound found in plants, and it's used to make oxalate, which helps to rid excess calcium in the plant by binding it. But this fungus used the acid in a different way. Instead of binding that calcium to build the tree up, oxalic acid, in this case in chestnut blight, was used to kill the tree's cambium, a crucial layer of tissue between the bark and the stem that creates a lot of new cells, thus promoting growth. Afterward, the fungus feeds on the dead tissue. The fungus distributed itself by means of microscopic seed-like spores formed in cavities in the diseased bark. And to add to that, there were summer spores and winter spores. The summer spores, which are pictured here in this slide, created an orangish brown sticky mass from the bark's cavities that sort of came out like toothpaste from the tube following warm summer rains. And these spores would stick to the feet of birds and insects, and they would, of course, carry them long distances, spreading the infection further and spreading it across very, very long distances. So the winter spores puffed from other bark cavities in tiny clouds, and they were carried by the wind to nearby trees. So either way, there was a lot of distribution happening over multiple parts of the year, which allowed the spread to be so rapid. Both kinds of spores could infect a healthy tree. So as long as they were carried into a wound and could germinate the tree, sending their fine fungus threads into the inner bark, killing vital cells as they invaded. Once this bark killing reached all the way around a tree or branch, death of all parts beyond followed. Just like that, a giant became a ghost. American chestnut stands began to decline by the hundreds and thousands. Through the 1920s and 30s, chestnut blight spread its arms wide from the southern mountains of Appalachia and North Carolina out to the edges of Ohio, to the point that today, Very few stands are known that don't carry some amount of chestnut blight in some capacity, which led many to believe we may have seen the last of American chestnut, the ecosystems and lifestyle that helped to maintain. Even with such a voracious fungus, hope remained strong in my mind and heart, and many other scientists as well. As I began to refresh my memory of the American chestnut, specifically for this presentation, I noticed that the answers could be wrapped up in the species traits and even its genes. As I cannot go anywhere without talking about fire ecology's role in the forest, American chestnut cannot be excluded either. American chestnut once coexisted with many drier woodland and fire-adapted species like, say, chestnut pine and pitch pine. And as its decline continued, the makeup of these forests changed right along with it. Now mostly made up of species dependent on moderate moisture and having fire sensitivities like sugar maple, tulip poplar, or the most popular tree here in DC, American beech. These changes in the structure of the forest suggest alterations to the fire regime's food availability for birds and mammals, an ultimate decline in chestnut moss, changes in nutrient cycling, and the way that woody debris decomposes. History suggests frequent fires in forests within the American chestnut range. The most direct evidence of this in American chestnut has come from charcoal and pollen analyses and soil and sediment studies, where they show periods of high fire activity, or there is a large charcoal accumulation that's happened from that, and they have coincided with abundance of American chestnut pollen. In another study showing similar charcoal distribution where there's a high abundance, there was indication that fire was not being limited to just these dry ridge tops that we know of fire happening, but also fire was extending downslope toward more temperate areas of the forest. So this information, plus the high flammability of American chestnut leaf litter, invites fire to the table again and again in a shorter amount of time. All of these being clues that sort of tell us a little bit more that American chestnut has some special fire adaptation. They are a long living species and they grow quickly, allowing them to maintain large heights, which limits the potential for crown fire and giving them the ability to rapidly heal from fire-induced wounds. The trees are also deeply rooted and produce sprouts in high numbers. So in openings created from a wave of fire disturbance, we would expect that American chestnut jumped at the opportunity to catch some sunlight and disperse seedlings. The same rapid reproduction and deep root system is why the species is considered functionally extinct, because chestnut blight does not kill the tree root system and has continued to show survival through stump sprouts that in time die back down. American chestnut and other species show similar traits. These may have promoted a more frequent, lower intensity fire regime. Today, we know many years of fire suppression in forested ecosystems and have not seen fires at that frequency or intensity in some time. The fire regime we know today, mostly absent of American chestnut, is meek compared and has been pushed along by prescribed fire, hoping to restore fire-adapted ecosystems. As of 2018, American chestnut is listed under the International Union for Conservation of Nature, or the IUCN Red List, as critically endangered, which is kind of an unsettling feature. Its battle with chestnut blight and the resulting changes in its former ecosystem has pushed it further and further towards extinction. However, what I didn't mention was that early in the battle of the chestnut blight, it was observed that the Chinese and Japanese chestnut species planted in this country did not succumb to the blight. It was thought that making hybrid trees and introducing them in place of the susceptible American chestnut would work. Unfortunately, even with their good blight resistance, they weren't well equipped to thrive in US eastern forests like American chestnut once did. Organizations like the American Chestnut Foundation continue to do research to find the perfect mixture of genes for blight resistance. Back in the 80s, they introduced their back-cross breeding program, which had a consequence of genetically modifying the American chestnut genome with a small percentage of the Asian genome so that the species would persist in its forest ecosystem, but also have blight resistance. So having enough of equal parts so that they could survive and thrive long-term like before. But given the complications of many separate Asian chestnut genes contributing to blight resistance, it complicated the breeding process. To this day, the American Chestnut Foundation's sole goal and purpose is to pursue research to develop blight resistance and initiate reintroduction of American chestnut. What I'm gonna show you in these next two slides is actually research that has been led by researchers at SUNY ESF College, and they have leaned towards more technologically advanced methods of transgenic modification. Transgenic meaning introducing one or more DNA sequences from another species. Under this approach, a single gene, in this case, an enzyme called oxalic oxidase, is transferred to the American chestnut's genome. The enzyme breaks down the deadly oxalic acid into hydrogen peroxide and carbon dioxide, which is harmless to the tree. So first, I'm gonna go ahead and show you these are small cuts. One is an American chestnut exposed to blight, Chinese chestnut, American chestnut that has been injected to reduce blight, and another. And you'll see how LS1 will succumb to blight over a period of 1 minute and 30 seconds. Very time lapse. Okay, quite dramatic, but as dramatic as the decline of American chestnut is showing you that these other species have a more blight resistance than the original LS1, and that ultimately, though it is American chestnut growing quite rapidly, ready to shoot for the sky, getting that sunlight, when blight hits it, it impedes that growth process by killing the opportunity for American chestnut to produce new cells and continue growth. Those in favor of this method offer that it differs from the hit and miss approach that comes with conventional crossbreeding, which transfers tens of thousands of Asian chestnut genes that are also prone to unknown threats and consequences from potential mutation. This next video is Dr. William Powell, who's demonstrating how field inoculations of chestnut are performed to determine levels of chestnut blight resistance.
What we're doing is inoculating a stem that's about 1 centimeter or larger in size. Probably going to go with 1 centimeter to 1.2 centimeters. And the idea is to inoculate it in a way that it's very consistent from tree to tree, so we can make comparisons easily. So the first thing I'm going to do is to pick an area that I know is the right size. That's okay, so it's at least that's about 1.4 centimeters or so in width, so that's good enough. And what I'm going to do is make a mark that's half a centimeter apart, like that. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a pointy scalpel, and I'm going to go to the center of this. I'm just going to make a little hole with that scalpel. It's hard to see. And I'm going to take this little device called a nit picker. And the reason why I'm using this is so I can make a wound that's a equal depth on all the trees. And I'm just going to take that and I'm going to take the little hook, put it into where I just made that little wound, and I'm just going to pull this down, just down to the bottom. And I made a pretty nice even wound there. And so all the wounds should be about the same size. Then I'm going to take the culture that was grown. We're taking plugs from this culture that are from the outer margin. And we're going to take one of those plugs, such as that. I'm going to put it on a piece of parafilm. Remove the paper backing on the parafilm. And then, let's take this little hanging thing off there. And I'm going to try to put this directly onto the wound and press it up against it, just like that. Make it good and tight. I like to twist it back to kind of hold it in its place. Okay, and that's the inoculation. That will sit on there for a week. Then the parafilm will come off, and we'll see if we got a good inoculation start. And what we're going to do is, for each one, we're going to have a tag. This was inoculated with EP155.
So that's just to show you an example of how they use this technique, creating a wound and then seeing how the plant will respond to what, either having blight tolerance or being completely succumbed to chestnut blight. But again, where was I? In addition, proponents say that the precision of transferring only one gene as a measure of security when dealing with risk assessment and genetic engineering. So all of these studies are really trying to find the best way to sort of influence genetic engineering while also maintaining the integrity of the original American chestnut genome. The trees in this study in particular have been expressed as 100% American chestnut, containing all the species' original 38,000 genes. Tests, research, and varying applications of genetic modification have continued by other parties as well, mostly attempting to match the integrity of the original genome, like I was saying, with a little bit of blight resistance. Many in the conservation community question the use of non-native gene introduction in native tree species because it has a lot of unknown effects. We can also question the changes in considerations and demands for using the American chestnut now versus over 100 years ago. There are still many questions to be answered, but nonetheless, the blight persists. While yes, there are still American chestnuts among us, the future of the species in conclusion continues to shine a light on these historic facts. It maintains that one sprouts from blight-killed trees have all the genetic characteristics of parent trees. Therefore, if the parent tree is blight susceptible, the sprout can be expected to be equally susceptible. Thus, the vast crops of sprouts will inevitably die because of chestnut blight. Of thousands of reports to the U.S. Department of Agriculture on blight resistance, there is still not yielded a single case of blight immunity in the American species. The theory of the development of resistance through generations of, say, natural selection hasn't been adequately tested because only one generation of chestnut trees has developed from seed since the blight first struck. And then 4, there really is no evidence that the virulence of the fungus has decreased substantially enough to warrant a resurgence of American chestnut's former glory. So you may be thinking, what an interesting and somewhat disheartening story of such a special tree. I mean, a story that started and continues in the state of New York, where Staten Island just so happens to be. Staten Island, like many other places in New York, was a common home of the American chestnut, where it soon became uncommon. And Arthur Halleck, William T. Davis, Nathaniel Britton, and Charles Lang were among the early naturalists who brought together the original collections featured at the Staten Island Museum. While also, like us currently, we're among those who watched the species decline. How or what can you do to enjoy and remember the American chestnut? Collecting specimens for the museum perhaps may not be your best goal, But now you have so much more information on the species and can use that to ID the species in your local area and other species that are in the chestnut family. What I've shared with you today also invites you into the discussion of how we maintain ecosystems in a rapidly changing world, where disease, climate, fire, and human desire all play a role in where it was once not considered. That being said, I will leave you with this poem by Avis A. Hawkins of Providence, Rhode Island, entitled A Scituate Chestnut Tree, courtesy of the American Chestnut Foundation. Yon looms a gnarled and sturdy tree, a giant scarred by many a storm, its branches home of wild birds free. How proud it rears its massive form, an emblem of that pilgrim stock who braved the bleak New England strand and planted firm on Plymouth Rock foundation for a nation grand. The meek-eyed cows through sultry days from lowland pasture that have strayed find shelter from the sun's fierce rays within its deep and cooling shade. And berry pickers, free from care, their noonday lunch in comfort eat, or huntsman and his pack off share in dreamy case this cool retreat. 'Neath summer skies it bloometh late, autumnal forests in rattling shower drop rich brown nuts to all who wait beneath its golden mantled bower. Squirrels and beasts of field and wood and groups of children blithe and gay collect the harvest rich and good and store for winter use await. Soon come the cold November days with frost and rain, falling leaves, but winter birds, the crows and jays, still flock around its sheltering eaves. Its branches bare, 'tis left alone to wintry winds and curling sleet. Around its head the cold winds moan and buried deep in snow its feet. With all its gift beneficent, its stalwart stand from year to year, and rugged strength magnificent, sharp outline on the azure clear. Deep rooted against all change it braves, the tempest rush, the howling gale. Aloft its banner proud it waves, a patriarch staunch and strong in hail. A lesson here, who runs may read, from monarch of the field and wood, to spare the trees from selfish greed. Concerned then to the nation's good, who plants a tree, if not besides, bestows a boon of priceless worth, creates a sense of civic pride, and helps with joy to fill the earth. Then plant them on the shadeless street, in every city in our land, in country lanes where lovers meet, by dusty roads yet deep with sand, on hillside bleak or river's brink, on every barren plot of ground, by pond or brook where cattle drink, that grateful shade may ever abound. And men and women, children all, united this needed work to share, protect the trees, both large and small, no effort for their welfare spare. Then through centuries, they shall stand with arms outstretched in benison, a worthy tribute to the land, a living, glorious horizon. Thank you to the Staten Island Museum for having me today to speak on the American chestnut, and to all of you for your open and listening ears.
Thank you so much, Portia. That was incredible. I feel inspired and a little sad. But yeah, I think we have a question in the house.
Okay, let
Esther,
me
do you have a question?
Yes.
Oh, we're just gonna need you to unmute, Esther. Esther? I'm gonna ask you to unmute. I can't hear you.
I'm
Oh, there.
sorry, I forgot that I was muted. Yeah, I used to hike a lot with the Appalachian Mountain Club between the late 80s and into the early 2000s, and they always mentioned that there were no chestnut trees left. And so I always had the impression that because of the blight, that there was absolutely no more chestnuts left. And then my daughter went to a wedding 2 weeks ago in Bloomsbury, Pennsylvania. And the woman who was, has the place for the venue bakes bread from the chestnuts, from the trees on those grounds. And she gave my daughter a handful, and I made them because I said, "You sure these are chestnuts and not horse chestnuts?" She goes, "No, the woman told me they're chestnuts." And sure enough, they were chestnuts. I was so bowled over by that. I really didn't know.
Yeah.
So can you tell me, so there are surviving chestnuts?
And it's mostly because after this rapid sort of push to save chestnuts, as the science evolved, there's lots of different plantings, lots of different conservation efforts. So they're out there, but again, they're heavily mixed between all of these also non-native species of chestnut, like Chinese and Japanese, and of course, horse chestnuts, which often people can't differentiate between horse chestnuts and American chestnut. So they're still out there, they're slim picking, and most of the time they're gonna be exposed to blight. If they haven't been exposed, I'm sure we're not seeing them on a daily basis. Somebody who really knows is probably out there like, here's the golden one.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing. So the horse chestnuts, I've seen them, you see them around all the time. They're not edible at all, and they're from an entirely different tree family, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
They're in the same tree family as, say, yellow buckeye. They have their leaf pattern is almost like your hand spread out, more than, say, American chestnut are these long, sort of sharp, ovate leaves. They kind of look like a sword with teeth on the ends. So yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing and coming.
Yeah, I loved it. Guys, and we also had a comment in the chat from Carl. Awesome talk. So they were saying that they found them in their wanderings in Staten Island, the best of which was bulldozed for a shopping plaza. I'm not that surprised, but yeah, there have been sightings of them in Staten Island. Carl says the tree they mentioned had repeatedly suckered from the base, which I've also read about.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. And LaPortia, can you put your social media handles or any information so that folks know how to reach you should questions arise, and so that they can follow your incredible work?
Of course.
And thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for spending part of your day learning with us. Please stay tuned to our website for the 140 Object exhibition, as well as upcoming programs for adults and families. The Staten Island Museum is open Friday through Sunday, 11 to 5, and we hope we see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can I ask one last question, and I'll leave you alone? I just want to know, so where would I be able to find on Staten Island any chestnut trees?
Carl, you got any ideas?
So hi, I'm Colleen Evans. I'm the Director of Natural Sciences at the museum. I don't know of any living American chestnut trees on the island. I do know we have a lot of horse chestnut. We have a lot of other trees that might look like an American chestnut, but I don't know of any living ones. I could be wrong, of course. There could be some hiding. We do have some good woods around here, but I don't know of any.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.